Millionaire shocked by scratches, shocking action that shocks everyone. Silence also makes people. Victor Alvarez is a millionaire who believes his wealth can fix any problem, until one sunny afternoon, when a simple car scratch changes everything. Dressed in a polished suit and exuding the confidence of a powerful entrepreneur, Victor feels certain his money gives him control. But then he meets Livia, a woman in a wheelchair, whose quiet dignity and refusal to accept pity spark an unexpected internal conflict for this high-flying businessman. Their worlds collide in a moment of tension and curiosity, leaving readers to wonder, will Victor's wealth truly solve everything, or will Livia's resilience unveil a deeper truth worth exploring? Victor Alvarez parked his sleek, navy blue sedan along a bustling city street on a sunny afternoon. The sidewalk shimmered with late-day heat, and office buildings towered on both sides of the avenue. Pedestrians hurried past, clutching takeout coffees or scrolling through their phones. Construction cranes loomed in the distance, while car horns blared in a symphony of urban chaos. Despite the noise, Victor felt oddly calm. He had just finished a significant business meeting and was contemplating his next move in the corporate world. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his tall, athletic frame, he looked every bit the self-assured entrepreneur he was. His thick, dark hair was trimmed neatly, and his confident stride conveyed a sense of purpose. For Victor, life was a constant quest for success, and he believed money could solve almost any problem, until that day. Just as he sat behind the wheel, scrolling through emails on his phone, he heard a sharp metallic screech. His heart sank. Stepping out, he discovered a noticeable scratch along the side of his impeccably polished car. The culprit appeared to be a woman in a wheelchair, her expression colored by both alarm and dismay. She wore simple jeans and a short-sleeved blouse, her long hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Meeting Victor's gaze, she blushed slightly, as if expecting him to burst into anger. I'm sorry, she stammered, adjusting the position of her wheelchair so it wouldn't roll further. One of the wheels looked out of alignment. My wheelchair slipped on the uneven sidewalk. I swear, I didn't mean to damage your car. Victor ran his fingers over the scratch, feeling the coarse groove on the otherwise flawless surface. Normally, he would have been livid. The paint job alone had cost more than most people's monthly salaries. But something in the woman's eyes, perhaps the quiet dignity mixed with embarrassment, caught his attention. Instead of demanding compensation, he asked, "Are you hurt?" The woman, who introduced herself as Livia, seemed taken aback by his response. Most people in such a situation would be screaming about the car's damage. "No, I'm fine," she replied softly, her voice slightly shaking from stress. "But I can pay for the repair. It'll take me some time." Victor paused, crossing his arms but keeping his tone calm. "Don't worry about the paint job. It's just a scratch. I'm more concerned about you." He nodded toward the bent wheel of her chair. "That looks like it could cause you bigger problems if it snaps off or something." Livia tried to maneuver her wheelchair in place, grimacing a little when she realized how unstable it was. "I can handle it," she insisted, adjusting her posture to regain control. She squared her shoulders, refusing to appear helpless or needy. Victor crouched down next to her, examining the bent metal frame as though he were a mechanic. Up close, he could see her determined expression. She wasn't seeking pity. She clearly valued her independence and seemed embarrassed that she'd caused any trouble. "You sure you don't need help?" he repeated. "I can call a repair shop nearby." She gently shook her head. "No, thank you. I'll figure it out. Besides," she added with a faint smirk, "I doubt you have time to play mechanic." He stood back up, running a hand through his hair. Victor typically filled his days with high-profile meetings and back-to-back phone calls, but at that moment, he felt a strange tug of curiosity that made him set aside his usual priorities. "Actually, I might have more time than you think," he said. Then, without overthinking, he offered, "How about we go for a coffee?" We can find a better solution once we sit down and talk this through. A hint of surprise lit Livia's eyes. She hesitated. After all, he was a complete stranger. Yet, there was a sincerity in his voice she couldn't ignore. "All right," she finally said, a faint note of humor returning to her tone. "But if the coffee's bad, you're the one who's going to drink it." Victor chuckled, stepping aside so she could roll forward. "Deal," he replied simply, wearing a small smile. He took a moment to lock his car, not bothering to glare at the scratch again. Together, they headed toward a cozy cafe down the block, drawing curious glances from passers-by. Some couldn't help but stare at the striking contrast, an impeccably dressed man walking beside a woman in a wheelchair. Yet Victor didn't seem to mind. He even moved aside a couple of chairs in the cafe so that Livia could maneuver comfortably to a table near the window. The interior of the coffee shop was warm and inviting. Exposed brick walls, potted plants along the window ledges, and a chalkboard menu listing specialty lattes gave the space a friendly vibe. Livia ordered a simple black coffee, while Victor opted for a latte. Soft acoustic music played from hidden speakers, weaving a gentle soundtrack around them. As they chatted, Victor learned more about Livia. She wasn't one to open up easily, but she revealed that she volunteered at a local nonprofit organization assisting kids with disabilities. She loved the work, calling it both demanding and deeply rewarding. There, she helped manage projects that brought educational resources and social activities to underprivileged youth, many of whom also used wheelchairs. "What about you?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "You must be used to fancy boardrooms, fancy deals, fancy friends, everything fancy." Her tone was half question, half statement, as if she were testing how he would respond. Victor took a sip of his latte, thinking carefully. "I've spent my life believing wealth could solve anything," he admitted. "I own a few hotels." "A few?" Livia interjected, arching a brow, clearly amused by his understatement. He offered a wry smile. "All right, I own a chain of hotels," he clarified. "Anyway, money can solve some problems, sure. But not everything." He paused for a moment, recalling the many times he'd felt an inexplicable emptiness despite his success. "Not the important things," he added more quietly, as if admitting a secret. Livia looked at him more closely, as though sizing him up. "So you're saying all that wealth and power aren't enough?" She teased him lightly, but her tone carried genuine curiosity. Victor shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "Wealth isn't a cure-all. It can become a barrier, isolating you from what's real. Sometimes, I miss out on the ordinary experiences that define everyday life, experiences like this." His voice had taken on an introspective timbre, surprising even himself. For a brief moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the sun catching in Livia's hair as she gazed out the window. Victor couldn't help but notice how her presence relaxed him, how the usual tension in his shoulders eased. It felt refreshing to talk to someone who wasn't immediately impressed or intimidated by his net worth. Once they finished their drinks, Livia insisted on paying for her own coffee. Victor let her but handed her his business card. "In case you change your mind about that wheelchair repair," he said. He tried to sound casual, yet his sincerity was apparent. She accepted the card, glancing at the crisp design and bold lettering of his name and contact. "Thanks," she replied, tucking it into her wallet. "I'll think about it." They stepped outside. The late afternoon sun hung low, bathing the sidewalk in warm, golden light. Victor locked eyes with Livia one more time, feeling an unfamiliar pang of regret that they had to part ways. She just gave him a polite nod before maneuvering her wheelchair into the crowd, disappearing among passers-by. Victor watched her go, a swirl of emotions in his chest that he couldn't quite categorize, admiration, curiosity, something more personal. He returned to his now slightly blemished car, slid into the driver's seat and turned the key in the ignition. Instead of feeling annoyed at the scratch, he found himself smiling. The everyday concerns that usually weighed him down, the deals, the contracts, the endless obligations, somehow felt less important compared to the day's unexpected encounter. Even the persistent hum of city traffic seemed less daunting. He drove off, Livia's determined expression filling his thoughts. That night, Victor arrived at his penthouse, an elegant, modern space with high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's sparkling skyline. Usually, he felt a rush of satisfaction stepping into such luxury. But this time, the emptiness of the silent rooms pressed on him. He set his briefcase down on a marble countertop, letting out a soft sigh. Under normal circumstances, he would fix himself a high-end whiskey and settle into the plush leather sofa. Now, he barely noticed the gleaming surfaces and designer furniture. Wandering onto his terrace, Victor leaned on the railing, gazing out at the glittering buildings. The air was balmy, with the faint rumble of distant traffic drifting upward. Typically, that view reminded him of his status, of how far he had climbed the corporate ladder. Yet the memory of Livia, her face, her unyielding independence, occupied his mind more than any thought of success. When he closed his eyes, he recalled the moment she rolled into the cafe, refusing to let anyone help her unless she truly needed it. He remembered the way she sipped her coffee so matter-of-factly while calling him out on his assumptions about money. A smile tugged at his lips, thinking how she embodied a strength he rarely encountered in his own social circle. That night, as he attempted to sleep, Victor found himself turning over in bed, wondering what it would take to see her again. Normally, he didn't chase after chance encounters. His phone was filled with business contacts, acquaintances, and casual friendships. But Livia was different. She wasn't awestruck by his success or legacy. She seemed to peer straight through his polished exterior, making him want to prove that he was more than just a wealthy hotel magnate. Meanwhile, in her small apartment on the other side of town, Livia sat by a worn wooden table, flipping Victor's business card between her fingers. A single lamp lit the space, and the faint hum of traffic outside reminded her she was still in the same city that had challenged her for so long. Even though she felt a spark of curiosity, she was guarded. She'd seen too many people swoop in, offer help, then vanish or pity her without respecting her independence. Yet, she couldn't deny the trace of kindness in Victor's eyes. He hadn't thrown a tantrum over a scratch on his expensive car. He had cared about her well-being first. That alone set him apart from so many others. Sighing, she placed the card in a small jar she kept on her kitchen counter, a jar for items she wasn't quite ready to throw away but didn't know what to do with. She stared at it for a moment, feeling a perplexing mix of gratitude and confusion swirling inside her. It seemed unlikely their paths would cross again, unless she decided otherwise. That was the night they both wondered about each other, Victor drifting off in a luxurious penthouse, Livia in a modest apartment with chipped paint on the walls. A scratched car had brought them together, but 1,000 unspoken questions lay between them. Neither could predict how fate would intervene next, pulling them down a path of growth, redemption, and unexpected emotional depth. For now, both of them would go to sleep alone, replaying the day's events and silently questioning whether this fleeting connection could possibly lead to something bigger. Neither had any real answers yet. But in the fleeting hush of the night, their stories started to intertwine, hinting at an extraordinary journey yet to unfold. The day after Victor Alvarez met Livia, he woke up before sunrise in his luxurious penthouse, feeling oddly restless. Usually, his mornings were methodical, an early workout, a shower, then scanning financial news before heading to his first business meeting. But on this particular morning, an uneasy energy lingered. His thoughts kept drifting to Livia and the fleeting moments they had shared at the cafe. Even the impressive skyline view outside his bedroom window seemed less captivating than usual. The clang of city buses and the faint hum of distant traffic resonated through the glass. Rather than letting the swirl of morning routines dictate his pace, Victor spent an extra moment sipping black coffee on his terrace, revisiting the conversation he'd had with Livia. Her sincerity, her unwavering independence, and the quiet determination in her eyes had left a mark. He wanted to see her again, needed to, if only to quell his curiosity about how someone could be so grounded amid life's challenges. That same morning, on the other side of town, Livia rolled across the worn floor of her small apartment, preparing for her day at the nonprofit organization. She tugged a hoodie over her shoulders and double-checked the alignment of her wheelchair's bent wheel, wincing at how it still shifted slightly under her weight. Fixing it would require time and money she didn't have, and a part of her debated whether she should use Victor's business card to ask for help. Yet pride nudged her to manage on her own. A fleeting image of Victor's concerned face popped into her mind, his gentle question, "Are you hurt?" still echoed. She shook her head, refusing to dwell on the memory. She had work to do and couldn't afford to be distracted by a wealthy stranger. By 9 o'clock, Victor found himself in his office, a modern space with sleek furniture and an expansive view of the city. The phone beeped incessantly, and his assistant, Naomi, a poised woman in her early 30s, entered with a stack of folders. "Mr. Alvarez," she began, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, "you have the hotel development meeting at 10. Then a luncheon with the board, and afterward, an interview with a journalist from Business Sphere." Victor nodded absently, scanning the documents for any urgent tasks. His reflection glinted on a glass cabinet, catching him staring vacantly. Suddenly, he closed the folder and set it aside. "Naomi," he said, voice calm but resolute. "Could you reschedule my morning appointments? Something important came up." She blinked, momentarily surprised by his unusual request. "Certainly. Shall I inform the board that you'll be delayed?" "Yes. And find out if there's a local nonprofit called," he paused, recalling Livia's words, "it might be listed under Hope Rise Foundation or something along those lines. I believe they work with kids who have disabilities." Naomi jotted down a note, her eyes flicking with curiosity. "I'll look into it right away." Less than an hour later, Victor was navigating the cramped streets on the outskirts of downtown, guided by the address Naomi had uncovered. Gone was his typical driver and luxury sedan. He'd insisted on driving himself in a company car that was more discreet. Roadside stalls sold fresh fruit and flowers, and children dashed around in makeshift playgrounds, oblivious to the dusty sidewalks. This part of the city was far from the glamorous world Victor was used to. The buildings were weather-worn, with peeling paint and graffiti, but they radiated a vitality and closeness he rarely saw. He parked in front of a modest, single-story building flanked by a small yard. A hand-painted sign read Hope Rise Foundation in vibrant green letters. Children's voices and laughter filtered through the open windows, offering a warm counterpoint to the dull roar of traffic behind him. Victor squared his shoulders, inhaling deeply before stepping inside. The lobby was small and simple, with plastic chairs lined against a sky-blue wall. Bulletin boards showcased colorful drawings, weekly activity schedules, and photos of smiling kids at various events. A young volunteer noticed Victor lingering by the entrance and waved him in. He was directed to the main activity room, where children of different ages, some in wheelchairs, some on crutches, were painting bright murals on large sheets of paper. Amid the cheerful chaos, he spotted Livia. She sat at a low table, guiding a little boy's hand as he painstakingly colored in a sketch of a sun. Her eyes shone with gentle warmth. Her hair was pulled into a practical ponytail, and despite the casual hoodie and jeans, she seemed entirely in her element, confident, empathetic, and completely focused on the child's needs. For a moment, Victor just observed the scene, struck by how different this world was from the polished boardrooms he frequented. Eventually, Livia lifted her gaze and locked eyes with him. Surprise flickered across her face, quickly replaced by a guarded expression. Carefully, she handed the drawing tools to another volunteer before rolling away from the table to meet him. "Victor," she said quietly, stopping a few feet away. "I wasn't expecting you." Her tone wasn't rude, but neither was it welcoming. Victor sensed the barrier. "I wanted to check if you got your wheelchair repaired," he offered, feeling a bit awkward. "And I realized you mentioned you work here, so I came to see the place." She glanced around at the bustling room, as if worried about how others might perceive a wealthy businessman dropping by unannounced. "Well, as you can see," she said, "I manage without a perfect wheel. The kids keep me busy." Victor nodded, casting another glance at the children. "They seem happy," he remarked softly. "Looks like you're making a real difference." Livia's gaze flicked toward a child who was giggling over a spilled pot of paint. "I try. But it's never enough. We're always short on supplies, and these kids deserve more than we can currently give." Before Victor could reply, a volunteer called Livia's name, asking for help setting up an art station. She shot Victor an apologetic look. "I have to go. Our staff is thin, and we have a lot going on today." "Then let me help," he said abruptly, surprising himself. She narrowed her eyes. "Help how? You're not exactly dressed for finger painting." He was indeed wearing tailored trousers and a crisp shirt, clothes he usually donned for corporate negotiations, not for gluing macaroni or tidying up after energetic kids. But he offered a confident, if slightly sheepish, shrug. "I'll manage. Show me what to do." A trace of a smile tugged at her lips. "Fine," she conceded, though skepticism lingered in her eyes. "Come with me." She guided him through the activity stations. He helped distribute crayons, poured water into plastic cups for brush cleaning, and wiped down tables when paint or glue spilled. It was messy work. Small children demanded attention all at once, clamoring for help with a coloring sheet or a bottle of glitter. Yet Victor felt a surprising sense of fulfillment as he knelt to talk with a little girl who wore braces on her legs. He found himself chatting, learning that she loved stories about princesses who saved themselves instead of waiting for princes. Amid the clutter and boisterous chatter, he momentarily forgot about quarterly reports, board members, and future expansions. Instead, he was immersed in the immediate needs and unfiltered emotions of children who simply wanted to create something beautiful. Livia, darting across the room in her wheelchair, offered pointers whenever he looked lost. Occasionally, their eyes met in shared amusement or mutual acknowledgement that this was a far cry from his usual domain. 2 hours later, chaos began to wind down. Volunteers ushered kids outside for a short break. Victor's shirt sported a rainbow of paint smudges, and sticky bits of glitter clung to his cuffs. He didn't mind. Sweat glistened on his forehead, and he breathed out, slightly exhausted but oddly gratified. Livia maneuvered closer, holding a stack of papers. "You survived," she teased, eyeing his disheveled appearance. "I'm impressed. Most people who drop by either treat this like a quick photo op or rush out when they realize how demanding it is." Victor smiled, genuinely relieved she seemed a bit more open now. "It's more challenging than my board meetings, but in a good way," he admitted. Then, more seriously, "if you need supplies, or help, or anything, really, let me know. I'd like to support the foundation." Her face went serious. "The last thing I want is a handout," she cautioned. "A lot of wealthy individuals like to drop donations and vanish, just so they can say they did a good deed. I don't want that." "I understand," Victor replied, meeting her eyes. "I'm not just offering money. I'd like to be involved." She studied him for a moment, and he could see the wheels turning in her mind. Did she trust him enough to let him in? The brief silence was broken when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, sighed, and rolled away slightly to answer the call. While Livia spoke softly into the phone, Victor's gaze wandered to the children's artwork pinned along the walls. Crayon suns, rainbows, and stick figure families captured a naive optimism that made him smile. He noticed a half-finished mural in the corner, a bright city skyline with outstretched hands. The lower portion remained blank, as if awaiting more contributions. The idea resonated with him, an unfinished canvas, full of possibility. Moments later, Livia hung up and returned. "That was one of our sponsors," she said in a level voice. "They can't renew their grant this quarter, which means we'll have to cut back on some art programs." Frustration etched across her face. "We've tried reaching out to new donors, but the nonprofit world is competitive. Everyone's fighting for limited resources." Instinctively, Victor offered, "Let me help you set up some contacts. I know people who might be interested in supporting a worthy cause." She hesitated. "I'm not sure if mixing your high-end world with ours is a great idea," she admitted. "But we do need help," she acknowledged finally, exhaling in resignation. "I'll think about it." Victor nodded, understanding her reservations. "Take your time. I won't push." Then a warm grin spread across his face. "But I won't disappear either." A few volunteers began cleaning up, mopping paint-splattered floors and stacking plastic chairs. The mid-afternoon sunlight pouring in through the windows cast a golden glow on the tired yet content faces of everyone inside. The kids straggled back in, sweaty from outdoor games, big smiles on their faces. One little boy tugged on Victor's pants, holding up a glittery drawing. "For you," the child said proudly. Victor knelt and accepted the picture of a giant star, touched by the simple gift. Livia watched the exchange, a thoughtful expression softening her features. Perhaps it was in that moment she realized Victor might be more than just a well-dressed businessman looking to boost his reputation. She saw genuine compassion behind his polished exterior, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to have him around more often. They called it a day, eventually guiding the kids to a communal lunch area. Victor stayed long enough to help serve sandwiches and juice boxes, exchanging easy banter with some of the staff. A few volunteers eyed him curiously. This tall, suited man covered in flecks of glitter and paint was far from their usual visitor profile. But the kids took to him readily, bragging about their drawings and telling him stories. At one point, Livia approached him with a damp towel. "You might want to clean up," she said, gesturing at the neon green paint smeared on his sleeve. "Right," he laughed, dabbing at the stubborn stain. Then he stepped aside, voice dropping slightly in volume. "Look, I'd like to see you again. Not just to talk about funding or kids' programs, but maybe for dinner." Her eyebrows shot up. "Dinner? I figure we got a good start at that cafe," he replied, attempting a nonchalant shrug while unable to fully hide his nerves. "But if it's too soon or if you're not interested." She paused, as if weighing the pros and cons. "You're persistent," she noted, her tone carrying a playful edge. After a moment, she added, "All right. But pick a place without a dress code that costs more than my monthly rent, okay?" Victor felt relief wash over him. "I promise to keep it casual," he said, smiling. "I'll send you the details." With that tentative agreement, a new sense of optimism settled between them. The difference in their worlds was obvious, his suits and penthouse versus her wheel-scarred floor and daily struggles for funding. Yet something tangible connected them, genuine empathy. Perhaps it was the shared belief that helping others, and allowing oneself to be helped, were two sides of the same coin. By late afternoon, as the nonprofit wrapped up its activities, Victor prepared to leave. He shook hands with some of the volunteers, who seemed cautiously appreciative of his support. Livia accompanied him to the entrance, the squeak of her wheelchair echoing off the scuffed floors. Outside, he paused, inhaling the hot city air, noticing how a nearby vacant lot was overgrown with wildflowers and strewn debris, a metaphor, perhaps, for the neglected corners of life that Livia fought to improve. Before parting, she gave a final wave. "I'll wait for your text," she said, just loud enough to be heard over a passing truck. Victor nodded, stepping off the curb toward his parked car. "I'll be in touch soon." He opened the door, about to slide into the driver's seat, then hesitated. Turning back, he caught one last glimpse of Livia in the doorway, her expression unreadable yet not unkind. An electric sense of possibility charged the air. He realized that forging a connection with someone like her might be one of the most meaningful things he had ever attempted, riskier in some ways than any corporate venture, but possibly far more rewarding. When he finally drove away, his mind felt clearer, his purpose more defined. Livia was no longer just the woman who scratched his car, she was a catalyst, an invitation to see life differently. And for the first time in years, Victor felt eager, excited, even, about the unknown. Deep down, he knew that wherever this path led, it would change him more profoundly than any of his business conquests. And despite the challenges, he suspected that was exactly what he needed. Late the next afternoon, Victor Alvarez parked his car on a residential street lined with quaint, single-story homes. The sky above glowed with the purple hues of early evening, the air cool but thick with a sense of anticipation. It was the night he and Livia had agreed on for dinner, a casual meal, as promised, far from the glitzy restaurants that typically surrounded Victor's high-end social circle. He'd chosen a local diner famous for its homemade pies and lively jukebox. The small, neon, open sign flickered above the doorway. Inside, red vinyl booths filled a narrow space, and a long counter displayed slices of fruit pies under glass covers. The walls were decorated with faded photographs of the city's history, black and white street views, old sports teams, and proud shopkeepers standing outside their original storefronts. The place hummed with voices and the sizzle of a grill in the kitchen. It felt like a world away from Victor's usual lavish dinners. Nervous, yet trying not to show it, he climbed out of the car, smoothed down his casual collared shirt, and walked toward Livia's apartment. Situated at the far end of the block, her small building had chipped paint and a rickety wooden ramp installed out front for wheelchair access. Though modest, it exuded a certain warmth. A neighbor had placed potted flowers along the stairs, their purple blooms catching the last rays of daylight. Livia appeared at the door before he could knock, wearing fitted jeans and a simple blouse. Her long hair was tied back in a neat ponytail. She maneuvered down the ramp in her wheelchair with practiced ease. "Hey," she said, smiling slightly. "I heard your car pull up." Victor grinned back. "I hope you're hungry," he replied. "I found a diner a few blocks over. It's nothing fancy, but I've heard they make the best chicken pot pie in the city." "Sounds perfect," Livia answered, pressing her palms against the wheels to move forward. She drew closer, glancing at him almost shyly. "You look nervous. Are you sure you're not expecting a Michelin star meal?" He chuckled, relieved by her playful tone. "No starched tablecloths or string quartets tonight," he promised. "Let's keep things simple." They headed down the sidewalk at a relaxed pace, Livia rolling beside him while he occasionally adjusted his steps to match hers. Neighbors sat on their porches, sipping iced tea or calling out greetings. The scent of someone's barbecue drifted through the air, mingling with the faint sound of a dog barking in the distance. Every so often, a passing car would slow, its driver curious about the well-dressed man and the determined woman moving through the neighborhood. Upon arriving at the diner, Victor held the door open, making sure Livia could enter without hassle. Inside, a few customers glanced up from their meals, but quickly returned to their conversations. The hum of the neon sign and the chatter of families filled the room. Overhead, a fluorescent light buzzed softly. A friendly waitress with curly hair and a floral apron spotted them and motioned toward a corner booth that could easily fit Livia's wheelchair. "Sit anywhere you like," the waitress said, flashing a welcoming smile. "I'll be right with you." Victor positioned himself on the bench across from Livia, feeling more at ease than he had in a long time. Something about this no-frills environment allowed him to breathe more freely than the polished hotel dining rooms he was used to. Livia looked around, observing the black and white photos on the wall, a faint curiosity in her eyes. "So," she began, folding her hands in her lap. "How was your day?" Victor shrugged, leaning forward. "Normal routine, meetings with my management team, a few phone calls about expanding one of my hotels. But I couldn't stop thinking about tonight." Her cheeks tinted pink at the confession, and she fiddled with the menu, glancing at the diner's selection of comfort foods. "You weren't tempted to cancel after that stressful day?" she teased. "Not a chance," he replied immediately, smiling. "I've been looking forward to this all week." Their conversation flowed effortlessly, occasionally interrupted by the waitress delivering water, bread rolls, and then taking their order, chicken pot pie for both, accompanied by 2 slices of warm apple pie for dessert. Midway through their meal, Victor noticed Livia's gaze drifting to the small jukebox in the corner. A weathered sign read, "Plays your favorite tunes for a quarter." "You want to pick a song?" he asked. Livia shrugged but smiled as she rolled over to the jukebox. Rifling through the song list, she ended up selecting an old rock ballad with a steady, comforting rhythm. The warm guitar chords filtered through the diner, blending with the clink of utensils and low conversations. Victor joined her, placing a quarter in the slot for the next track, choosing a classic Motown tune. Laughing together, they teased each other's taste in music as they returned to their table. They continued chatting about everyday topics, the kids at the foundation, Victor's upcoming projects, and the small challenges Livia faced in navigating the city with limited accessibility. He listened intently, disturbed by stories of broken ramps or sidewalks that forced her to take lengthy detours. In turn, she asked about the hotel industry, his travels, and how he juggled such a demanding schedule. Eventually, the waitress approached with the check, smiling at their lively conversation. "You two look like you're having a good time," she observed, leaving the bill on the table. Victor swiftly grabbed it before Livia could protest. She narrowed her eyes jokingly. "You paid for coffee last time," he reminded her. "It's my turn." "Oh, right," she relented with a small grin. "Fine. But next time we go somewhere, I pick up the tab." "Deal." Once outside, the moon had risen above the rooftops, bathing the street in a pale glow. The lamps lining the sidewalks flickered on. Despite the hour, they walked, and rolled, slowly, neither wanting the evening to end too soon. Livia paused near an old bench under a streetlight and looked up at him. "I had a really nice time," she said softly. "Thanks for not dragging me to some flashy corporate dinner." Victor chuckled. "This was so much better," he said genuinely. "No suits, no board members, no endless business talk." He paused, gathering the courage to voice what was on his mind. "I'd love to see you again, maybe at the foundation, maybe somewhere else. I don't want to just be the guy who shows up for a meal." She studied his face carefully, as if searching for any hint of insincerity. Satisfied, she nodded. "I'd like that, too." Their eyes lingered on each other, a tension in the air that felt both exciting and comforting. Then Livia let out a small laugh as a pair of teenagers zipped by on skateboards, almost crashing into the bench. They leaped off at the last moment, apologizing loudly before rolling away. Victor and Livia watched them vanish into the night, both slightly amused. He walked her home, and they stood under her building's dim porch light. The dull hum of a nearby street lamp provided a gentle backdrop, and a neighbor's wind chimes produced a soft, tinkling melody in the breeze. "Thanks again," she said, settling her wheelchair to face him directly. "I'll see you soon." He hesitated, a little unsure of how to say goodbye. Before he could overthink it, he leaned down and lightly brushed a kiss on her cheek. Her face grew warm, and a tiny smile formed on her lips. "Good night, Livia," he said softly. "Good night, Victor." He watched as she wheeled up the ramp and disappeared into her apartment. Only then did he turn around, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His chest felt light, almost giddy. The diner date might have been ordinary by many standards, but for him, it had been nothing short of transformative. In the days that followed, Victor's life didn't slow down. Meetings demanded his attention, and an upcoming negotiation for a new hotel property kept him and his assistant, Naomi, working late into the evenings. Yet, amidst all the business chaos, he felt a renewed sense of balance. He called Livia whenever he could, sometimes just to hear her voice. They texted about their days. She would send him photos of the kids painting murals at the non-profit, and he would send her snapshots of boardrooms or new design proposals for his hotels, adding humorous captions about how dull everything looked without a splash of paint. Soon, though, the contrast between their lives began to draw unwanted attention. One evening, Victor attended a high-profile charity gala, an event he couldn't easily skip, filled with wealthy donors, politicians, and socialites. He wore his usual tailored suit, feeling out of place among people who often gossip more about each other's net worth than about actual charitable causes. During the event, he found himself cornered by two old acquaintances, Gregory and Sandra, who sipped expensive champagne and eyed him with curiosity. "Victor," Gregory drawled, adjusting the cufflinks on his custom shirt. "We've been hearing rumors about you spending time at some children's foundation. What's that about?" "Yes," Sandra chimed in, arching a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Very unlike you to be so hands-on, dear." Victor pressed his lips into a thin line, determined not to let their incredulous tones rattle him. "I'm helping out with a friend's organization," he said simply. "It's important work." They exchanged a glance. "A friend, you say?" Gregory mused, smirking. "Someone special, perhaps?" Victor felt heat rise to his temples. He thought of Livia, her unwavering spirit, her warmth, and realized he refused to hide or belittle their connection. "She's very special, actually," he admitted, voice firm. Sandra's expression flickered with surprise, but she shrugged, swirling the champagne in her glass. "Well, just be cautious, Victor," she said, lowering her voice as if divulging some secret. "Not everyone fits in our circles." At those words, Victor's composure slipped. He took a measured breath to keep from responding harshly. "Maybe it's time our circles changed," he said coldly, excusing himself and leaving them behind. The incident confirmed what he already suspected: some people in his sphere might not accept Livia easily. Yet, the idea of giving up on her never crossed his mind. He'd rather lose superficial connections than pretend Livia wasn't a part of his life. Meanwhile, Livia could sense a shift whenever she met Victor's friends or attended events in his world. Her wheelchair drew stares and whispers, subtle but persistent. One evening, a sharp-tongued acquaintance of Victor's loudly asked how she'd managed to climb up to a penthouse. Though Victor immediately called out the rude remark, the sting lingered. Livia wasn't ashamed of who she was, but she worried about how this negativity might affect Victor's reputation and the foundation's image. Unsure of how to navigate these clashing realities, she confided in the one place she felt safe, the Hope Rise Foundation. She spoke to a fellow volunteer named Carolina, who listened with empathy. Carolina, a middle-aged woman who used crutches, offered gentle reassurance. "If Victor cares about you, he'll stand by your side," she said. "And if you care about him, you'll let him make that choice." It was a simple truth, but it resonated deeply with Livia. A few days later, Victor invited Livia for a walk in a public garden known for its fragrant rose bushes and winding pathways. The sun was setting, painting the horizon in shades of orange and pink. They strolled through the garden, the sweet scent of blossoms filling the air, while birds trilled softly from the treetops. They stopped by a small pond dotted with lily pads. Livia watched a couple of ducks gliding on the water, seemingly untroubled by anything beyond their next meal. She inhaled the floral breeze, letting the calmness soak in. "Are you okay?" Victor asked, noticing her silence. She faced him, her eyes steady. "Yes and no. I'm happy when I'm with you. But I'm worried your world will never accept me." Victor took a moment before responding. "Some people might not. But that's their loss. I can't change how everyone thinks. But I can change who I surround myself with, and I choose you, Livia." His words were quiet yet resolute, and for a moment, all the tension she'd been carrying melted away. She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining as they gazed at each other, the pond reflecting the sky's warm twilight glow. "Thank you," she whispered, voice catching in her throat. "I just don't want to be a burden." "You're never a burden," he replied, gently squeezing her hand. "You're the person who opened my eyes to a better version of myself." They stood like that, hand in hand, until the sun dipped below the horizon, and garden lamps flickered on, illuminating the winding paths with soft golden orbs. In that quiet corner of the city, surrounded by fragrant flowers and the gentle rustle of leaves, both of them felt a surge of hope. There was no guarantee that their journey would be easy, life rarely offers that. But in each other's presence, they saw the possibility of something genuine and lasting. That evening, as Victor drove Livia home, the city lights blurred into streaks of yellow and white along the highway. Conversation flowed with a newfound closeness, each of them acknowledging that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The journey was just beginning, but the foundation of trust and mutual respect they had laid felt strong enough to carry them through any storm. And in the hush of that nighttime drive, the simple knowledge that they had chosen each other was more than enough. The seemingly accidental encounter between Victor, a millionaire who believes that money can solve everything, and Livia, a proud woman in a wheelchair, reveals the true value of empathy, respect and love. The story shows that money is not the key to all problems, and sometimes, a sincere heart is the greatest source of strength. From the beginning, when Livia scratches her car, to the difficult times when two opposing worlds collide, it is love and understanding that connects them, helping them overcome prejudice to come together. How do you feel about this story? Leave a comment to share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next inspirational content. If you find it interesting, click like and share the video to spread the positive message to more people.